You know, I've never considered Holy Diver or the albums that came after it to be solo projects. I think because the name of the band is Dio, that everyone assumed that with my incredible ego that I must have called it that because I'm very egotistical, but that's not true. I called it that because it was the quickest route to people knowing who it was going to be. Because I did have some fame from Rainbow and from Black Sabbath, so it was a real connecting part of it. So I never considered them to be solo albums. Solo album to me would be an album that I played drums and guitar and bass and sang and did absolutely everything. But I've never been a solo artist. I'm only as good as the people that I play with. It was never in my mind to call it Dio from the get-go. It was always to call it, you know, the floor or the ceiling or the Klieg light or what. It didn't have a name really. Never considered calling it Dio because again, I'm not that kind of an egotistical person. But my manager, who was my wife at the time, Wendy Dio, said, "Why don't you call it Dio?" Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, and that's just how it came out. It just seemed apropos, simple, and that's what we were looking for. Some simplicity, I think. I've never ever written any material other than for the project that I'm going to do. Therefore, when I was in Black Sabbath or in Rainbow, I didn't write things that later became in the band that followed. So I've never done that. I thought that was always unfair and very selfish. And again, being a team member, I've always felt myself part of a band. I would feel that I was cheating, you know, the people that I'd chosen to play with, and those are the people that I respect, and I would never do that. So no, I only wrote material for that album when the time came. Well, Holy Diver was the first song that I wrote for what was going to become the Holy Diver album. I also wrote Don't Talk to Strangers after that, feeling that I wanted to have something to present to the people who were going to be in the band. And that's exactly what happened, and was very fortunate that we did have them, else it would have been a lot more difficult, I think. But at least there was some semblance of rules to follow now. And I think having those two songs made the others easier to write by the rest of the people in the band. So those were the first two, yeah. We never really did a demo. We didn't do a demo for these songs, for Holy Diver or Don't Talk to Strangers, because we were still trying to choose musicians. And the first musician that I had with me was Vinny Appice, who was the drummer with me in Black Sabbath. So we played them together in rehearsal form. I played guitar on those, yes, but I always waited for the real guitar player to come along, because I'm not the real guitar player. But you know, I wrote them on guitar and played them just as an example for as I say, the real people who came in after me. Jake Lee was one of the people that we were considering to be in the band. So, as I said previously, we did not do any demos for it. We actually went in and started to record the things. And so what you heard on that record was the first time it was recorded. And Jake just happened to be not one of the people that I chose to be in the band. But we did consider him, and we did play together in a rehearsal situation just briefly, but that's the only way that you can really find out whether it's going to be a cohesive partnership. And we just didn't feel that he was quite what we were looking for. Choosing the musicians in the band was easy initially because it was Vinny and myself. So I had a drummer. That was very important to me. And Vinny was my best friend in the band in Sabbath. And he's a great musician. I knew it was all going to work. He was very supportive. And he was out of work too, because when I left Sabbath, he left with me. Or I guess there's a better explanation for that one. We'll leave that one alone. We're not talking about them. I then, because I'd worked with British guitar players for such a long time, a la Ritchie Blackmore in Rainbow, Tony Iommi in Black Sabbath, and I just really loved the way British players played. I thought that they once again reinformed the American public as to how it should be done. So I wanted to go back there again. So Vinny and I flew over to London and looked for about a week for some players. Couldn't find any, went to clubs, went to the Marquee and a few other places, listening to bands, and just didn't hear anything that we liked at all. At that point I contacted the man who became our bass player, a guy that I had worked with before, Jimmy Bain, who played with me in Rainbow. And he said he had a couple of guitar players that he knew, and would he like me to bring him me a tape? And I said, yes, please, and he did. And the two guitar players were John Sykes, who then went on to play with Whitesnake and played with Thin Lizzy and then his own band, and Vivian Campbell, who became our guitar player. Vivian, I just loved the way he played. He was very young. He was only 19 years old, and he just had that specialness about him. I mean, John was a great guitar player and still is, of course, but there was something really special about Viv, especially since he really was unknown. I liked that, too. So Jimmy enlisted himself as the bass player without even asking. That was okay. It worked. And we then called Vivian, who is Irish, and was living in Belfast, just outside of Belfast. And he flew down the next day. We got a rehearsal hall together, rehearsed for 2 days, introduced the songs to him that we had written, Holy Diver and Don't Talk to Strangers. And it was just magic. It worked right away. So we did the second day just in case. Didn't really need any more than an hour to play with him before we knew that this was going to work. And asked, Viv and Jimmy would they like to be in the band, and they both said yes. And virtually 3 days later, they were both in Los Angeles, and we started the project. That's how we found them. Well, I actually did consider using Martin Birch for the production of that first album, but it was only a consideration. I think because I felt that I had paid my dues, and I had learned from, at the elbows of some really good people, Martin Birch being one of them, Roger Glover certainly being another one, man that I worked with for such a long time, the bassist and great creator in Deep Purple and in Rainbow as well. I really felt I had a good finger on the pulse of what this was supposed to be, and I really wanted to control it myself. I kind of had gotten really full up with being told what to do, and because I felt that I just knew what I had to do. So after I considered Martin, that was it. Martin, I think at the time, was doing an album for Iron Maiden, I believe, and I just took the bull by the horns and said, I'm going to do it myself, and I did. The engineer we used, a man named Angelo Arcuri, was actually our out front sound mixer for Sabbath, and happened to be a guy that grew up with our drummer Vinny Appice in Brooklyn, New York. So I knew him very well. He had never done any kind of engineering of that magnitude in a studio, so both of us were real novices. So we had no idea about what rules to break or what rules we were supposed to follow, and that was the best part of it all. And I think we proved to each other that we really knew what we were doing, because it's all about your ears. If you've got good ears, you should be able to do it very easily. And so, production was in the cards for me. I really wanted to do it myself. I wanted to tackle it. But I did think of some people early on, but that went away quickly. We decided to do things in production our own way. And with the drums, we built a room of plywood, backing the drums onto the window of the control room, and completely encased them with a roof and sides of plywood and a hollow wooden floor. And it just gave us a sound that was unbelievable, so live and, again, untested because we didn't know what we were doing. But as I said before, it was all about ears. So yeah, it was an unusual way to do it. I hadn't seen anyone do that before. So, we didn't know any better, but that's what we did. There's a funny story about my relationship with Ted, and he was at Warner Brothers at the time, of course the label that we did much of the deal work with. And Ted, as you've suggested, has quite a reputation. We'd started the project. We were probably a month into it. We got a call from someone at Warner Brothers who said, what are you doing? I said, well, we're doing the album that we owe you. Because, to explain that a little bit further, when we re-signed with Black Sabbath with Warner Brothers yet again, they insisted that they sign me to a solo deal as well. So I guess that meant they liked me quite a bit. So I had a solo album all ready to go, and a contract ready to go. So when the time came, I took advantage of that, went into the studio and started, and as I say, a month later we got a call, Ted needs to speak to you about what you're doing. So I went to the studio, or to Warner Brothers at 10 o'clock in the morning, which seemed a very ungodly hour to me, seeing we were spending a lot of time in the studio. And we were there at 10, and Ted wasn't. And Ted came wandering in and said, who called this meeting at 10 o'clock? And I said, well, it wasn't me, Ted. He said, so why are we here? I said, well, because I'm doing an album for you. And he said, oh, right, right. And he said, who's producing it? And I said, I am. And he said, well, go produce it then. That was it. So I got, you know, complete okay from Ted, who was a, you know, a musician and, you know, a lot of simpatico that way. So it was great. Never heard another word from them until they heard someone wandered down to the studio one day after a couple of months of work and heard the song Rainbow in the Dark. And that opened the floodgates, and they went, oh, I think we have something here, don't we? Well, I always knew we had something there, but I guess we needed to wake them up. But that was what happened with Ted. Rainbow in the Dark was not my favorite song. I felt it was too poppy. After all, I've just come from Black Sabbath, and you can't get any heavier than that. And that's the kind of music I really loved. And I just thought it was a little bit sing-songy and a bit poppy. And I thought we had better choices. So I was about to put a razor blade to the tape and destroy it. And they talked me out of it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And it turned out to be a great song, and it's heavy enough. I felt more liberated on this project in all ways. I think lyric writing, you know, was one of them, that I could do whatever I wanted to, and no one could or would tell me what to do. But you know, I never had that problem before. I didn't have that problem in Rainbow, and I didn't have that problem in Black Sabbath. So it really wasn't a problem for me at all. I didn't feel that I now was let off the leash, so to speak. But certainly, you know, in hindsight and you know, in the back of my mind, I'm sure that it had some bearing on the situation, knowing that I could do whatever I wanted to do. But it never was a problem before, and it didn't turn out to be a problem this time. I think writing in a fantasy manner is my natural instinct. As a child, I read an awful lot. And I think most of the things I read were novels that really led me down that path. I read a lot of Walter Scott things, a lot of science fiction by great science fiction writers who cloak a lot of the things that they do in fantasy as well. And I think that early reading pattern and the idea that I knew that to be successful you have to be a little bit different than anyone else. So I wanted to use really the same subjects that everyone talks about these days, but put them in a different way, put them in a different time perhaps, let people use their imagination, because that's what those books did for me. It made me conjure up the image of a dragon, which we've never seen, we'll never see. Thinking of knights of the Round Table, the wonderful attitude of chivalry, good things, you know, and then of course there was the dark side of it too, and you know, without darkness there is no light. So again, the early reading and the thought that I must be different, I have to do this differently than anyone else has, led me down that path, and that's why I wrote that way, and that's why I continue to. I think sometimes people have to do that, but what I've tried to do is I've tried to write so that many people can have different ideas about what that song is. The song Rainbow in the Dark, for example, I'll have 10 people give me 10 different attitudes of what that song is about. So I've accomplished what I've set out to do. I've made them think, and I've made that song their song, because I'm writing for them. I'm sometimes writing about them too, but I'm writing for them, and I usually have a tendency to write more for the downtrodden than anyone else. Not being the tallest individual on the face of the planet, I know what it's like to be you know, looked down upon by tall people, and you know, not just because they're higher than I am, but you know, there's a stigma that comes with being too fat, too short, too tall, too everything. And I've always felt that people have suffered because of that, and I wanted them to know that, hey, look what I did. I overcame it all. It didn't matter to me. It never bothered me. I didn't care about stature. All I cared about was what was inside the package. And so I think that writing that way made people have to use their imagination and also understand that I was writing a song for them, and make it your own. The artwork on the Holy Dauber album was meant to have people ask the question, why do you have a monster drowning a priest? So that my reply could be, how do you know it's not a priest drowning a monster? And certainly in this day that we live in, priests have a little bit of a monster image now, I think. So maybe I knew more than I thought at that point. But the whole idea was, as I mentioned before, look inside the package before you make a determination as to what's in it. And that means look at the heart of the person, look at the spirit of the person before you condemn them for something that you don't know. So yes, I wanted it to be controversial. Controversy also sells too. And you have to be a businessman at some point as well. I think Holy Diver took people by surprise. I think maybe because it had so many great songs on it. It's almost one of those perfect albums. I've been involved, I think, in 3 perfect albums in my mind, anyway. One is, to me, was the second Rainbow album, which was called Rainbow Rising. The first Black Sabbath album that I did with the band, Heaven and Hell, and this one. And each one of them was almost a flagship for a generation of people. It happened almost 10 years apart. And it hearkened in a new generation of rock fans. So I've been very fortunate with that. And I think it did surprise people, but it didn't surprise me because it was so chock full of good songs. I just think, again, it was surprising because it was such a good album. Wow, where did that come from? I think it was stunning. But it proved itself to be the winner that I expected it to be. Actually, I'll say that's not true. It proved itself to be the winner that everyone else expected it to be. I was very concerned that it was not going to be successful because a lot of the onus was on me. After all, I did put my name on it. I had come from success before it, and I had remembered the first Rainbow album that I did with Ritchie Blackmore, and he was the same as I was for the Dio, making the release of the Dio album. He thought, gee, I hope this works, whereas all the rest of us in the band said, this is a great album. And he had some misgivings about it, just as I did. But they convinced me that it was going to work, and obviously people convinced me that it did work. I don't think it was expected to have a big production from us. No, I think what they expected was to hear those songs played by the great people who played them. But I wanted to always give something more. And I had always been well enamored with what Alice Cooper had done. I loved his stage shows. They were just so enthralling to me. And I wanted to carry that on. And I always felt that giving people more than they got from anyone else, especially with the ticket prices going up so much, was a boon to them. And it made me feel good about what we were doing. If I had not been in Sabbath and Rainbow and had the material to play when we did our first Dio tour, we would have done exactly what we did, which was all the songs from Holy Diver. But that album was only about 48 or 49 minutes long, and that wasn't long enough to play. So I was lucky that I had songs from other bands, and I was lucky that I had successful songs from other bands. And to this day, we still do those same songs, because if this band doesn't keep them alive, then you'll never hear them again, because Rainbow is non-existent, and the Black Sabbath that is now is the Black Sabbath with Ozzy in it, and it's not the band that will be playing those songs. And they're such good material, and they've withstood the test of certainly 20 years now, if not longer, actually longer than that. In the case of Rainbow, 30 years. And they become expected. They're just, good music is good music. And believe me, I'm not comparing the music I made to Bach and Beethoven and the masters, but in some ways their material lasted for such a long time because it was good music, and if it's good music, it'll last. So yeah, I was very lucky to have those things to fall back on to make the set longer, but now I've locked myself in and I've painted myself in the corner, and I always have to do them, but it's okay, I like them still. Well, there have been so many songs of Rainbow and so many songs of Sabbath that it's been very difficult to choose them. So what we do is we do some on one tour, and then we'll choose other ones on another tour, which is really excellent, because that way you don't see the same set all the time. And people are surprised when oh, I didn't know you were going to do that. Oh, how wonderful. And we still do that to this day. There's so much material to choose from the past. Not only now, past from Rainbow and Black Sabbath, but of course past from Dio too. So many albums to choose from. So life is good when it comes to that, and we're always making new product. So we have just a plethora of material to choose from. I think Holy Diver, because of the musicianship and because of the so many good songs, stands up to absolutely anything that I've been involved with. Again, I've mentioned before the album, the very first Rainbow album I really liked as well, which was called Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. The second album, which was the one that really kind of got us there, was the album called Rainbow Rising. That and Heaven and Hell and Holy Diver, I think, are among the best things that I've ever been part of. So I think it stands up with absolutely anything I've done that was good. Having been so fortunate to have 3 great albums under my belt, Rainbow Rising, Heaven and Hell, A Holy Diver, and thinking in some way that perhaps I'm one of the few people who's been part of 3 great albums that way, I think someone else will probably top that at some point. I hope they do, because good music is good music and I want to hear it as well. I've just been very lucky to have been in the right place at the right time with some talent that I've known how to use with some extremely talented people. But I think that that'll happen again. No record goes unbroken. I hope they do. I've already done part of the singing for a film that Jack Black and his partner Kyle Gass, who are known more for a band they have called Tenacious D. I've done the vocal part of that, and then I will be appearing in the film as myself. Jack and Kyle did a video for me for a song that was called Push, and they were in the video, and that's where I met Jack. And didn't realize what an incredible fan Jack was of my work. I had no idea. And I told him what a fan I was of his work, too. And getting to know him was just a joy. He's one of the most intense human beings I've ever known. So incredibly talented. Great guy. So knowledgeable about rock music. And we hit it off right away. And after we did the video for the song, the Dio song, he said to me that he and Kyle were writing a film, and that one day they would be doing it. And would I appear in the film? And I said, of course I would, absolutely. So about 2 years down the line, I got a letter from Jack, from his production company. And the letter said, Dio, that's what he calls it. Dio, I'm finally making the movie, and I want you to play the part of Ronnie James Dio. He said, and if you don't, I probably won't make the movie. And he said, well, I probably will, but it won't be as good as if you weren't in it. So would you please do it? And so I called him, and I said, of course I would, Jack. And he was so pleased, and I was pleased as well. So as I say, I've done the music for my part of the film already, and my premise is Meatloaf plays his father. And again, I play me, and my part in it really is that as a young kid, he was told that he really shouldn't be looking at Dio posters or that evil kind of stuff, or that Holy Diver poster by his dad, and his dad didn't want him to be part of any of that, and his dad was quite oppressive to him. And at one point, he's praying to my pictures, saying, please help me and give me some advice, and I come to life, and that becomes my part in the film. So it's my first film, even though it's just tiny, tiny little part, and I don't consider myself to be really any kind of actor or in the film, really. I'm being me. But it was wonderful. For one reason, it was wonderful because I'm glad that I could do it for Jack. I could please him. Secondly, I got a SAG card out of it, Screen Actors Guild card out of it. So now I can do other movies, and very easily, too. But it'll be a joy. I'm doing it, I think, on the 15th of July. I'm going to go into the filming situation, and I have no idea what to expect. But if it's anything like doing videos, it'll be the most boring thing that's ever happened, because all you do is hurry up and wait. Hurry up and wait. So I hope I can just do it quickly. All I have to do is lip sync the part. I think I can do that. But I'm looking forward to it very much.